Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Diversity Matters event. I'd like to introduce you to this session's speaker, Catherine Woodward, who will be talking about social mobility. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks, Natasha. Right, so I'll just introduce myself and say a few things about me. I'm a solicitor at Gordon's. We're in Leeds and Bradford. I work in commercial litigation, which is commercial disputes, IP, insolvency, things like that. And I've also recently been appointed as the Vice President of Leeds Law Society. I've been asked to talk about social mobility today, which I think is quite an interesting topic and one that's sort of discussed in very broad strokes, but people don't like to go into detail about it much because with things like social mobility, people don't want to acknowledge that they've had some advantages that maybe others haven't, and you don't want to feel like you are, I don't know, doing yourself down sometimes when you talk about the problems you've had and the struggles you've had that maybe others haven't. So a bit about me generally. I'm from Wakefield. You can't tell, but one of the things I don't have is a very broad Wakefield accent unless you ply me with a lot of wine, and in which case it becomes incredibly broad. And I went to a school there, which it was a Catholic school, so I don't think it's really a state school, but it was still a sort of your average comprehensive. Someone set fire to my hair on the bus. And I was the child of a teacher and a social worker, and the first in my family to go to university. One of the things we didn't have growing up was anyone, when I was growing up and deciding what I wanted to do, we didn't really know any lawyers. There were no connections there or anything like that. So I didn't really know what I was doing aside from the guidance from sort of the counsellors at school, who also didn't really know what they were doing, because that being funny, I went to school in Wakefield, and if you're from there, the expectations are maybe not that high. I wasn't really sure what to do to get into a career in law other than get good grades and go to university and sort of hope for the best. So one of the things I've learned over my path through law is that whilst that's kind of right, it's definitely not enough. And you realise that more and more as you meet more people within the profession. So I got the grades, I went to university in Manchester, and again, I kind of floated along trying to figure out what I should be doing. I mean, so to give you an idea about exactly how clueless I was, I didn't realise you had to go to law school at the end of your degree until some point during my first year at university. And so after that, I went to BPP in Leeds, University of Law, and graduated into the middle of the last recession and got my LPC, and then I had to paralegal for a while, which is fine. It was really interesting and useful. And then eventually, after several rounds of applications, I applied for and secured a training contract at Gordon's, and I've been there ever since because it's a very nice place. So I think as part of my job, I deal with a lot of different people, barristers, judges and clients, and they all run the gamut of people who come from a background like me, people who come from far more privileged backgrounds, and people who come from far less privileged backgrounds. And generally, I think it's very interesting to get to meet lots of people, but you do become more and more aware as you press along, both in your education and in your career, working with other lawyers, that there are maybe some differences depending on the background you're from. And I think it is unavoidable that to a certain extent the legal profession is still populated by people from much more privileged backgrounds than maybe certain people. As I said, it's really quite an awkward topic to talk about because you don't really want to insult anyone because of where they're from. And I think certainly one of the things I realised as I went along is that it's not necessarily just about the education you've had, but there's certainly, for me, I can always tell when we are interviewing our trainees, you can almost always tell who's gone to a state school and who hasn't. It's also about the connections people make and the abilities that they have to sort of make those connections both in terms of employment opportunities and now at my stage of my career, contacts for work for the firm and the clients that you're looking for, etc. For me, I think that I've been in many situations where I've become incredibly aware that I don't share I think I would describe as the cultural touch points of a lot of the people I'm dealing with. I remember once going for dinner in the judges' lodgings in Leeds, which I was really excited about. I thought it was going to be so fancy, and it really was. And I've never had an evening that was more stressful in my entire life because I didn't understand anything anyone was talking about, and it was awful. And I said to myself, I'd never go to anything like that again, which is terrible because it was a really good opportunity, but no one made any effort to include me in the topics of conversation that were being had. And it was just assumed that I should know about all the skiing and regattas and things like that. And I have no idea what's going on. It's something I've never been involved in before. And I think that things like that happen throughout your career in law. Certainly I was talking to one of my friends about this talk, because I was quite anxious about doing it. And she works in-house in a big insurer in London, and she's from Barrow and has quite a strong Barrow accent. And she's given me her top 3 inappropriate comments she's been given. The first of which is when she started, the managing partner told her to go for elocution lessons to flatten out her accent. Also, I think at the time she was there, Game of Thrones was quite popular, and there were lots of Jon Snow comments because I think he's from round up there. That was what the accent sounded a bit like. She also got, they were all talking about the Henley Regatta, and when she said she'd never been and didn't know what it was, everyone was absolutely horrified. And then I think my favourite was a misunderstanding about private members clubs, where she thought that maybe they were talking about either strip clubs or working men's clubs, and then it turned out it was things like the RAC and all sorts of bits and pieces, which I think comes back to one of the issues that I find in law with sort of different social backgrounds, is that the assumption always seems to be that you're at that level where maybe the more privileged people are, and there's quite often not any effort to understand the differences that may be present in other people, or any effort to make other people comfortable in the topics of conversation. There's also sometimes assumptions that people have always had the same opportunities as you, where that might not be the case. So someone I work with is from not far away from me in Wakefield, and he was like, well, we've got the same background. And I was talking to him about something once. I was like, well, we don't. You came from a family that knew what you needed to do from an early age to excel in a legal career. And then you went to the private school, and then you went to Oxbridge, which none of the things that I've done. So I don't think you can really compare our 2 backgrounds and our 2 outcomes. I think it's why we're having a rather heated discussion about something where I was probably going to go in, if I'm honest. It just carried on with that. So I think that there are always, throughout my career, there have been times when I've just been made to feel very uncomfortable because I don't fit into the conversations that are being had, because that's not my background, and no one's made any efforts to try and include me. However, I do think that's changing, and certainly there have been times when actually my background's been really helpful for me. We deal with a lot of owner-managed businesses, and once we had a very long trial down in London, and I had to take the client out because he was a bit stressed, and I was also looking after his mum. And we went to the pub, and he bought me a load of chicken dippers and a load of pints, and I can't imagine him having done that with the barristers, who admittedly I think by the end of it all he was a bit tired of dealing with, and I think he always felt like he had to be on best behaviour with them because he was very much a self-made man, and the whole reason he's a very, very interesting man. But anyway, the whole reason he made the business was to look after his mum and dad, and so I think he really appreciated that I wasn't talking down to them, and I sort of was from a similar background and understood, so it was helpful in that way. Also, I'm very pleased that one of the latest High Court judges appointed in Leeds is also she's from a council estate in Easington, and I was listening to the talk about how she got to where she did, and that was absolutely fascinating, with her family supporting her throughout. And I think particularly in the judiciary, it's great to see that change, because you need to have that understanding of different social backgrounds to be able to understand cases and the people that you're dealing with. And it takes a lot of time to see that change, but it's coming through, and I think it's really good. And I've had, her name's Anna Claire Jackson. I've had her as a case when she was a district judge, and she's excellent. And certainly nothing's held her back, and it should be seen that way, though I've no doubt that she could tell us lots of stories of the struggles and issues she's had, which would be far worse than anything I've experienced. I'm sorry, I always talk over. But I do understand that there are differences and problems, and overcoming them is hard, but what I would suggest that you do is you seek out the advice and support of others. So I'm always more than happy to talk to people and help them, and just suggest things that they can do. And I think from the point of view of when you're looking for a training contract or legal work, then it's trying to foster those connections that people from more privileged backgrounds might have without even trying, really. So by doing things like joining your local law society, which is why I'm the vice president of Leeds Law Society, that's being part of Leeds Law Society and the Leeds JLD is what helped me get my training contracts. It's making those connections for myself and not relying on sort of historical family or friend connections that you've made throughout your life growing up. You've got to go out and you've got to do it yourself. Making your own network of people who can support you. And I think ultimately not making assumptions about the background of others when you get to be in a position where you're dealing with people, and also making sure always that people around you feel comfortable. And I think that ties in with the assumptions thing. And I'm sorry, I went over, Natasha.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's brilliant. So I think we've got, also, sorry about the beginning with my issues. I couldn't see you, but everyone else could. From Sarah, who says, "Hi Catherine, how did you navigate the differences?"
Well, at the start, by just feeling very, very awkward and standing there very quietly, because I didn't know what to do when it was happening. I think as I've got more qualified and I've become a bit more brash, I just make the point that I don't know about that. And then I'll make them share my awkward feelings. Sometimes we've had barristers that will send me their advices and they'll cover them in bits of Latin, and there's an assumption that you know Latin. I don't know Latin, and I won't use those barristers again, and I'll tell their clerks why, because I don't think it's on to assume that I can. I mean, obviously there's the basic bits of Latin you need to know because they're legal principles or whatever, but just dropping bits of Latin in here or there and there in the expectation that you understand them already and can translate them really annoys me. It's one of my biggest bugbears, and I complain about it, and it doesn't happen anywhere near as much now. So I think a lot of it comes with the confidence to tell people, no, I don't know about that, and no, I don't think it's appropriate, or no, you need to understand that people don't share those experiences, I suppose. But frankly, that's just come with something that I do now. I'm bullshit, which is why I think it's important that people should support and make sure other people are comfortable in conversations, and that should be the starting point.
So you mentioned that some of the tips you had were examples of joining the Law Society. Are there any other tips you have for people who don't know anyone in the field and have no sort of foot in the door?
Going to events like this, it's all things I didn't do when I was younger until a bit later on in my attempts to find a training contract. So I always feel a bit hypocritical saying them, but it would have made such a difference. So going to events like this, keeping up on really the legal press, because it's things that, like reading the Law Gazette every now and then, will give you that extra edge in interviews. And it's just realising that you've got to do a lot more work really to get that information and knowledge and to learn where you should be looking. And there'll be resources online. But I really do think the main thing is going out and meeting some of the lawyers, because I know certainly me and a lot of my other friends from similar backgrounds, we always try really hard to help people, because we know those awkward moments and the recognition that all of a sudden you're thinking, oh God, I thought I'd done everything I had. I worked as hard as I possibly could. I got all the grades, yet here I am, and I'm still struggling. So you've got to make those connections.
That's interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to add just before we finish?
No, I do think it is changing. I'm aware as well. I feel slightly like I was feeling a bit like a fraud, because I'm not from exactly what you would class as a bad background, but I think also throughout my career I'm constantly struck by how much posher than me everyone else is. So I think don't be disheartened by the fact that sometimes you'll feel a bit out of place. One day, everyone will be much nicer to each other and it will be fine. And I suppose that's the overall theme of your Diversity Matters events. Everyone needs to be nicer to each other. And I can see someone saying in-house. Yeah. My friend went in-house. I think Anne might have missed the bit where I was telling about my friend in London who went in-house. She's not had anywhere near as many problems in-house. No one's told her to take elocution lessons. So.
Well, thank you, Catherine. That marks the end of this session. Our next speakers are Bavita Ray and Shanika Haynes. To join their talk, please exit this session and join the live sessions found on the homepage or sessions tab. Thank you.